Hey everybody, it's Randy Ray, the Literate Texan, coming to you tonight with a video about the 50 greatest books of all time. These were not books selected by me, except that I did select the website that generated the list. There's a website called thegreatestbooks.org, which has an algorithm. And the way the algorithm works is they've taken 410 best books of all time lists and given them certain rankings based on various criteria to score the books. Like one of the criteria is just how many times a particular book has shown up on one of these 410 lists. That's like a quantity over quality approach. But you might lose points, for example, in the algorithm if the particular list that we're talking about is regionally specific or something like that. Anyway, thegreatestbooks.org has the details about the algorithm on it if you want to find out more about it. But it kind of reminds me of Sight and Sound magazine has every 10 years they do a list of the best films of all time. And their algorithm's a little simpler than that. They send out a poll to 500 or 1,000 or 1,500 directors or film critics, I can't remember which, asking them to make a list of their 10 favorite films. And then every time a film is listed, that's considered a vote. The films with the most votes make the list. So, anyway, these are the 50 books on the top 50 greatest books of all time according to this particular algorithm. It's kind of a consensus list. And I'm going to share a little bit about my experience, if any, with these books. And if not, then I've got a little description on the website to read, and I'll talk about whether or not I'm interested in it. So, number 50 is The Diary of a Young Girl by Anne Frank. I have read this. It's remarkable. It's remarkably good. If you haven't read it, you should. It's a real-life account of a young Jewish girl hiding from the Nazis during World War II, and it's written as a diary. And, they hide out in a friend's house. It's really crazy. I think it's pretty famous. I think most of my viewers probably heard of it. I wasn't expecting to see it at number 50 on this particular list, but there it is. And I can't say that it doesn't deserve its spot there, but I'm probably not the one to choose or to say whether any of these deserve their spot. But yes, this is one that I've read. I'm going to keep a running tally of how many of these 50 books I've read, because even though I call myself the literate Texan, I'm not really that literate when it comes to the classics. My guess is I've probably read about a third of these, but we'll find out. That's one. Number 49 is 1001 Nights, also known as the Arabian Nights. And I think most people have heard of this. If you haven't heard of it, you've probably heard some of the stories from it. It's a collection of folk stories from the Middle East. The framing story is what's interesting about the Arabian Nights. There's a young woman who's supposed to be executed. I don't remember what her crime was. But the king delays her execution because she tells him a story every night. And I guess each story has a cliffhanger, so he doesn't want to kill her before he finds out the end of the story. So anyway, it's great. But if you want to know where Sinbad the Sailor came from, or Aladdin and his lamp, Ali Baba and the 40 Thieves, they're all part of 1001 Nights. I have not read this, although I'm familiar with it in the stories. That's number 49, 1001 Nights. Number 48 is Absalom by William Faulkner. And much to my chagrin, I have not read anything by William Faulkner, and I don't even know what the word Absalom means. This is a complex narrative about Thomas Sutpen, a poor white man who rises to power in the South, aiming to create a dynasty that would rival the old aristocratic families. What sounds interesting enough, other than the part about it being complex. I guess I don't mind complexity too much, but yeah, I don't know why, but I've never read anything by Faulkner. Probably time to change that. Number 47 is Beloved by Toni Morrison. I have read a book by Toni Morrison. It was called Sula, and it was really, really good. I've not read Beloved. This novel tells the story of a former African-American slave woman who, after escaping to Ohio, is haunted by the ghost of her deceased daughter. The protagonist is forced to confront her repressed memories and the horrific realities of her past, including the desperate acts she committed to protect her children from a life of slavery. Okay, yeah, I want to read that. That sounds really good. And I guess this is an example of African-American literature, Toni Morrison. She's really famous. I think Ralph Ellison is another example of a famous author in that particular genre. And James Baldwin, too. But, yeah, Toni Morrison's number 47 on the list with Beloved. Number 46 is The Little Prince, and I'm going to mangle the pronunciation of this author's name, by Antoine de Saint-Exupery. I'm sure they would love to hear me say that in Texan. Never read it. I remember when it was popular when I was in college. Everybody was reading and talking about it. A young prince from a tiny asteroid embarks on a journey across the universe, visiting various planets and meeting their strange inhabitants. Along the way, he learns about the follies and absurdities of the adult world, the nature of friendship, and the importance of retaining a childlike wonder and curiosity. His journey eventually leads him to Earth, of course, where he befriends a fox, of course, and learns about love and loss before finally returning to his asteroid. So yeah, that sounds interesting enough. I might give that a look. 46, The Little Prince by Antoine de Saint-Exupery. Number 45 is The Sun Also Rises by Ernest Hemingway. I get to make another check mark because I've read this one. Now, I read it a long time ago. And honestly, I thought it was pretty boring at the time, but I was a very young man. I was in my 20s when I read it. It's set in World War I. It's about a group of American and British expatriates living in Paris. They traveled to Pamplona, Spain for the running of the bulls. And I guess this is considered the ultimate lost generation novel. Hemingway, I think, is at his strongest when he's writing short stories. And his short stories are deceptively simple, but it's all iceberg theory. There's so much going on that's being left unsaid, but it's hinted at. So if you wanted some Hemingway short stories to read, and I've read all of them, you might consider The Snows of Kilimanjaro, Hills Like White Elephants. Those are really good. Things Fall Apart by Chinua Achebe. I'm probably mispronouncing that too. Heard of it? Never read it. This is number 44. This novel explores the life of Okonkwo, a respected warrior in the Umufia clan of the Igbo tribe in Nigeria during the late 1800s. Okonkwo's world is disrupted by the arrival of European missionaries and the subsequent clash of cultures. I'm pretty sure I have a copy of this in my bedroom library. You've never been to my house, but there are bookshelves in every room. Every room. And I usually know where all my books are. Number 43, On the Road by Jack Kerouac. On the Road by Jack Kerouac. I have not read On the Road by Jack Kerouac. However, I have read the sequel, which was called The Dharma Bums. And it was okay. I didn't hate it. I didn't love it. I guess I should go ahead and read On the Road. This novel follows the story of a young man and his friend as they embark on a series of cross-country road trips across America during the late 40s and early 50s. But I guess this is the Beat Generation novel, so probably worth checking out. Number 42, The Red and the Black. I get to make another check mark because I read The Red and the Black when I was in college. I majored in English and I took a class in European novels. This was written by Stendhal, and it is I'm quoting from the screen here, a detailed psychological portrait of Julian Sorrell, a young man from a provincial background who aspires to rise above his humble beginnings. I didn't care for this book then, but again, I was a really, really young man. I don't remember much about it, but I remember thinking it was pretty dull. I don't know that I would feel that way about it now. Might as well have not read it, given how little I remember of it. Number 41 is Midnight's Children by Salman Rushdie. Salman Rushdie's pretty famous because, but he's not really famous for Midnight's Children. He's famous for a book called The Satanic Verses. And I guess in the Middle East, I think it was Iran, declared a fatwa on him. I think I'm pronouncing that correctly. Anyway, they want to kill him for being blasphemous with his novel and stuff. And I think somebody tried to kill him a couple of years ago, and he wound up losing an eye over the whole deal. But one of the books that was on the National Book Awards list of nominees for nonfiction this year was also a Salman Rushdie book, and it was a memoir about, losing his eye and being attacked and stuff. I've not read Midnight's Children. It tells the story of Salim Sinai, who was born at the exact moment when India gained its independence. As a result, he shares a mystical connection with other children born at the same time, all of whom possess unique magical abilities. Okay, sounds interesting enough. I'll give it a shot. Number 40, The Master and Margarita by Mikhail Bulgakov. This one I have a copy of. It's also in my bedroom on a bookshelf. I didn't pick up the books to bring in here. I'm sorry. I know everybody likes to see me holding up the books and stuff. Now, I do have books on my desk here that I could hold up, but this isn't on the list. Sorry. The Master and Margarita is a complex narrative weaving together three distinct but intertwined stories. The first is set in 1930s Moscow, follows the devil and his entourage as they wreak havoc on the city's literary elite. The second story is a historical narrative about Pontius Pilate and his role in the crucifixion of Jesus Christ. And the third story is a love story between the titular master, a writer who has been driven to madness by the criticism of his work, and his devoted lover, Margarita. The novel is a satirical critique of Soviet society, particularly the literary establishment, and its treatment of artists. It also explores themes of love, sacrifice, and the nature of good and evil. I was given this book as a gift, and I'm looking forward to reading it. The Master and Margarita is number 40. Number 39, Les Miserables by Victor Hugo. Okay, so I've started this one this year, and I really, really enjoyed what I read of it. It's a huge, thick book. I think they call it The Brick, but I only got through about 100 pages of it. I think it's probably going to be one of my priorities in 2025 to read Les Miserables. I think 2025, I'm not going to read very many books, but the books that I read are going to be really long. And there's one book that I'm sure is going to be on this list somewhere, probably towards the very top. It's extremely long. You'll have to wait till the end of the video to see what that one is. Number 38 is the Iliad by Homer, which I have not read, but I've started and gave up on a few times when I was much, much younger. But it's a book about the Trojan War. I think most people know a lot of the stories when it, Helen in the face that launched 1,000 ships and the Trojan horse and so forth. But it's about a conflict between the city of Troy and the Greek city-states. It's an epic, which is a specific type of poem that's very, very long. And from what I understand from a video that I watched by Michael, I can't remember his name. Anyway, I didn't come up with this myself, but there's 4 authors to think of when you're thinking about epic poems because they're really hard to write. There's Homer, who wrote the Iliad, and he also wrote the Odyssey. But then there's also Virgil, who wrote the Aeneid. Then there's Dante, and then there's Milton. Milton's Paradise Lost is the epic format, but applied to the Christian myth. Benjamin McAvoy's the name. He had a similar video about the greatest books, but the list was different then, and he talked about each of them. Number 37 is Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. I don't think Dracula made the list, but Frankenstein did. Number 37, Frankenstein by Mary Shelley, also known as the modern Prometheus. Everybody knows about this. One of the interesting things about the novel is that there's a frame story, and then there's a frame story within it, and then there's a story inside both frame stories, which was kind of neat the way that was accomplished. But it's not particularly long. You can finish it in an afternoon probably if you give it a try. And I have read Frankenstein. Because I'm a horror fan and I like to read, some of the classics of horror. Number 36 is Invisible Man. There's no "the" in front of it. Invisible Man by Ralph Ellison. This is not a book that was turned into a movie starring, I don't remember, the guy from Casablanca. Anyway, great movie. Has nothing to do with this. This novel is part of the African-American literature. It's a poignant exploration of a young African-American man's journey through life. He grapples with issues of race, identity, and individuality in mid-20th century America. Never heard anybody say anything bad about it, but I still haven't read it yet. Number 35 is Mrs. Dalloway by Virginia Woolf. Now, I haven't read anything by Virginia Woolf. Benjamin McAvoy says I should read everything by Virginia Woolf. Maybe he's right. I don't know. I have an ex-girlfriend who's a huge Virginia Woolf fan. That kind of turns me off. But, sometimes she's right. Novel chronicles a day in the life of Clarissa Dalloway, a high society woman in post-World War I England, as she prepares for a party she's hosting that evening. Throughout the day, she encounters various characters from her past, including a former suitor and a shell-shocked war veteran. The narrative jumps back and forth in time and in and out of different characters' minds, exploring themes of mental illness, existentialism, and the nature of time. That sounds pretty interesting. Number 34, The Trial by Franz Kafka. Now, this is one that I've read. In fact, I've read most of Kafka, or some short stories that I haven't read yet. The Trial, to me, is a very frustrating novel. In fact, everything I've read by Kafka is very frustrating. Our society has become so Kafkaesque that it's hard for me to find the humor in it anymore, especially when I'm waiting in line somewhere. But you got to say something for an author whose last name has been turned into an adjective to describe the nature of life today. Benjamin McAvoy suggests reading the trial aloud to your friends and trying to find the humor in it. Apparently, when Kafka wrote these, that was what he did. Was it was meant to be really funny, and he would read it to his friends, and they would all laugh raucously. I did not have the reaction to it when I read it before. Of course, there's multiple translations. The original's written in Germany, which I don't read well enough to read it in German. I do know a smattering of German. But depending on the translation, the sentences can turn out kind of unwieldy. The verbs in German sentences often come at the very end of the sentence. Number 33, The Magic Mountain by Thomas Mann. Now, I've heard about this multiple times. It's about a young ordinary man visiting his cousin at a tuberculosis sanatorium in the Swiss Alps. He means to only stay for a few weeks, but he winds up staying there for 7 years and becoming a patient himself. Okay, that sounds interesting to me. I've heard about it. Some of the people that I admire on YouTube, like Steve Donahue, really admire this novel. So yeah, definitely one I want to read. Number 32, Adventures of Huckleberry Finn by Mark Twain. As my friend at Big Hard Books, or Big Hard Classic Books, Alan, likes to point out, it's not The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, it's Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. And this one, I've, of course, read multiple times. It is a solid candidate for the great American novel, and it's terrific. I did read Jim this year, or James by Percival Everett. James is the story of Huckleberry Finn told from the perspective of the slave, Jim, and it was wonderful. I also read a few years ago a novel called Just Finn, and it was by John Clinch, and it was the story of Huckleberry Finn basically told from the perspective of Huck's pap before he died. It's not a very long novel. But Huckleberry Finn is about the journey of a young boy named Huckleberry Finn and a runaway slave named Jim as they travel down the Mississippi River on a raft. It's a great example of a picaresque novel. Huckleberry Finn is a picaro. 31, Catch-22 by Joseph Heller. I always feel like I'm supposed to have read this, but the more I think about it, the more I think I have not read this. It's a satirical critique of the military bureaucracy and the illogical nature of war set during World War II. And I guess Catch-22 is like a no-win situation. No matter what you do, the outcome's going to be the same or negative, I think. Correct me in the comments if I've misunderstood what Catch-22 means. Number 30, Great Expectations by Charles Dickens. Okay, so I get to mark another one that I've read. I love Great Expectations. It's about a young orphan living with his cruel older sister and her kind blacksmith husband. He has an encounter with an escaped convict that changes his life. Now, I just got this yesterday. I've got a book here called Great Expectations, The Sons and Daughters of Charles Dickens by Robert Gottlieb. This is pretty cool. It has no relation to the novel Great Expectations other than it shares a title and has a different subtitle. And anyway, Dickens is great. Great Expectations is great. If you haven't read it, you definitely should. I'm not surprised to see it on this list because I love Charles Dickens and it's wonderful. Number 29 is the Bible. Yeah, I've read bits and pieces of it. I hadn't read all of it. Number 28, The Divine Comedy by Dante Alighieri. Okay, so my friend Hunter is currently reading The Divine Comedy, and he's not much of a reader, so I was excited to see that he was doing this reading. I don't know that this is what I would have started it on, since he's not much of a reader, but he seems to be enjoying it okay. He named his dog Dante. In this epic poem, the protagonist embarks on an extraordinary journey through hell, purgatory, and paradise. And he's guided by the ancient Roman poet Virgil and his beloved Beatrice. He encounters various historical and mythological figures in each of the realms, witnessing the eternal consequences of earthly sins and virtues. Excuse me. The journey serves as an allegory for the soul's progression towards God, offering profound insights into the nature of good and evil, free will, and divine justice. Okay, this sounds like something I need to give a look to. Number 27, Alice's Adventures in Wonderland by Lewis Carroll. I had a beautiful annotated edition of this that I bought for my daughters when they were young and read it to them. This novel follows the story of a young girl named Alice who falls down a rabbit hole into a fantastical world full of peculiar creatures and bizarre experiences. You've probably seen the Disney cartoon. You've probably heard of it. It's a classic. It's been around forever. I didn't know this about Lewis Carroll, but apparently he liked to take pictures of little girls in the nude. Ooh, Kind of creepy. I read a short story by Edward D. Hawk. It's a Christmas short story where Lewis Carroll, under his real name, goes to Sherlock Holmes for help because Moriarty's trying to blackmail him about the whole taking pictures thing. Take that for what it is. I still think Alice's Adventures in Wonderland's a great book, and you probably can figure from that what I think about separating the art from the artist, which is a topic of discussion that comes up every time there's a scandal. Number 26, Middlemarch by George Eliot. Okay, so I don't know anything about Middlemarch, but Benjamin McAvoy says it's life-changing. But he didn't say why. Set in the fictitious English town of Middlemarch during the early 19th century, the novel explores the complex web of relationships in a close-knit society. It follows the lives of several characters, primarily Dorothea Brooke, a young woman of idealistic fervor, and Tertius Lydgate, an ambitious young doctor, who both grapple with societal expectations, personal desires, and moral dilemmas. Their stories intertwine with a rich tapestry of other townsfolk reflecting themes of love, marriage, ambition, and reform, making a profound comment on the human condition. I understand it's a very long book, too. 26, Middlemarch by George Eliot. Number 25, Heart of Darkness by Joseph Conrad, which I've had on my shelf in the bedroom for I don't know how long. And I've been meaning to read it forever. It was the basis for the movie Apocalypse Now. I understand it's very short. It's actually a novella rather than a novel, and you can read it in an evening. It says this classic novel follows the journey of a seaman who travels up the Congo River into the African interior to meet a mysterious ivory trader. Throughout his journey, he encounters the harsh realities of imperialism, the brutal treatment of native Africans, and the depths of human cruelty and madness. The protagonist's journey into the heart of darkness serves as both a physical exploration of the African continent and a metaphorical exploration into the depths of human nature. And in Apocalypse Now, the action is moved from this time period and the Congo to a more modern time period during the Vietnam War in Vietnam. Number 24, Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte. Another one that I haven't read. This is a novel following the life of Jane Eyre, an orphan who is mistreated by her relatives and sent to a charity school. Benjamin McAvoy suggests reading all of the Bronte sisters in succession as a set. So this might be as good a place to start as any. I don't know. You could do them in any kind of order that you wanted to. He also suggested reading the poems of one of the Bronte sisters, but I don't remember which one. So, number 23, To the Lighthouse by Virginia Woolf. I believe she's the first author on this list to appear twice. This novel is a pioneering work of modernist literature that explores the Ramsay family's experience at their summer home on the Isle of Skye in Scotland. The narrative is divided into 3 sections, focusing on a day in the family's life, a description of the house during their absence, and their return after 10 years. The book is known for its stream of consciousness narrative technique and its exploration of topics such as the passage of time, the nature of art, and the female experience. Yeah, so I'll give it a shot. I'm probably going to try to hit all these books next year. Number 22, The Odyssey by Homer. Another epic poem. This is about Odysseus' return after the Trojan War. It's a sequel to the Iliad. And, you know, most people know some of the stories from Odysseus. It takes him 10 years to get back to Ithaca after the Trojan War. When he gets back, his wife's being pursued by all these suitors. It's really good. Number 21, The Grapes of Wrath by John Steinbeck, which I have read. And it's wonderful. Another candidate for the great American novel. The book follows the Joad family, Oklahoma farmers displaced from their land during the Great Depression. The family, alongside thousands of other Okies, traveled to California in search of work and a better life. This is one of the first adult novels that I ever read. The other adult novel that I read was The World According to Garp. I'm not sure which one of those two I read first. But I've reread The Grapes of Wrath multiple times, and I have no problem rereading it again. It's marvelous. Number 20. Now we're going to start getting into the Russians. The Brothers Karamazov by Fyodor Dostoevsky. I've not read any Russian literature at all, other than a couple of short stories. But it's a novel in 4 parts with an epilogue, and it's about the passionate and complex relationship between 4 brothers and their fathers in 19th century Russia. The Brothers Karamazov is where the Flying Karamazovs get their name. They're a juggling troupe. If you want to have some fun, look them up on YouTube. They're very funny. They're kind of a combination of the Marx Brothers, but with juggling. Number 19, Madame Bovary by Gustave Flaubert. In that, I have read this one too, but in that European novel class that I took in college, I also read Madame Bovary, which was slightly more interesting than the Red and the Black, but not much. I didn't care much for Madame Bovary either. It's a tragic novel about a young woman, Emma Bovary, who's married to a dull but kind-hearted doctor. She's dissatisfied with her life, so she embarks on a series of extramarital affairs and indulges in a luxurious lifestyle in an attempt to escape the banalities and emptiness of provincial life. It's not a sexy book, though. Number 18, The Sound and the Fury by William Faulkner. Okay. This is, I think, the third book by William Faulkner on this list, but I could be wrong. A complex exploration of the tragic Compson family from the American South, told from 4 distinct perspectives. Another stream of conscious narrative. Number 18, The Sound and the Fury. Number 17, The Stranger by Albert Camus. Okay, I read this one this year, and it's really short, and that's the nicest thing I can say about it. I didn't care for the novel. I found it kind of pointless. The narrative follows a man who, after the death of his mother, falls into a routine of indifference and emotional detachment, which leads him to commit an act of violence on a sun-drenched beach. He has a trial which becomes less about the act itself and more about his inability to conform to social norms. Really didn't do anything for me. Number 16, The Lord of the Rings by J.R.R. Tolkien. Okay, so I've read that. I've read it multiple times. I've read it more often than any of the other books on this list. It's wonderful. And I mean to read it this month, but I don't know if I'll get to it or manage to get through it this month. But yeah, it's wonderful. I read it as a kid, so I probably missed out on quite a bit of it. I know I skipped the poems a lot of times. Number 15, another Russian, War and Peace by Leo Tolstoy. This one's famous for being really long, too. Set in the backdrop of the Napoleonic era, the novel presents a panorama of Russian society and its descent into the chaos of war. Now, what I've heard about this novel is that a lot of the characters have really similar names, and it's a good idea to take notes about their names. Number 14, another Russian, Crime and Punishment by Fyodor Dostoevsky, another Dostoevsky. A young, impoverished former student in St. Petersburg formulates a plan to kill an unscrupulous pawnbroker so he can redistribute her wealth among the needy. So yeah, that one sounds good, and it's not crazy long from what I understand. Number 13, here I am complaining about long novels, is Don Quixote by Miguel de Cervantes, which I have read multiple times, and it's wonderful. It's very funny. I believe it is also considered the first, or if not the first, one of the first actual novels. But it's about a man who goes a little crazy, Don Quixote, thinks he's a knight errant from the old days, and he tries to live his life by the code of chivalry as he understands it from all the books that he's read about it. And he has a manservant who is his sidekick, Sancho Panza, which to me is the most significant part of the book because I believe that Don Quixote and Sancho Panza is the basis for Sherlock Holmes and Watson, Batman and Robin, and basically every other hero and sidekick tale that you can think of. Number 12, To Kill a Mockingbird by Harper Lee. Also a legitimate contender for Great American Novel. Harper Lee, they published a novel a few years ago called Go Set a Watchman, which seemed like an early draft of To Kill a Mockingbird. I did not read it, but I love the movie To Kill a Mockingbird. If you've never seen it, it's got Gregory Peck, and it's wonderful. But it's also a terrific book. It's beautifully written. I would love to revisit this one and read it again. Maybe I will this year. My daughters have read it too, and they liked it. Both my daughters liked it. Number 11, Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen. I'm a little embarrassed to say I haven't read this. I haven't read anything by Jane Austen. I do have an edition of this, but I don't like the edition that I have because it's got a bunch of recipes for snacks and stuff to serve during tea. And it's kind of distracting from the novel and the tone of the novel. I did start it, but didn't finish it. Number 10, Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronte. There's one of those Bronte sisters that we're supposed to read all together. A tale of love, revenge, and social class set in the Yorkshire moors. It revolves around the intense, complex relationship between Catherine Earnshaw and Heathcliff, an orphan adopted by Catherine's father. Yeah, so I'd like to read that. That sounds good. Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronte at number 10. We are in the top 10 now. Number 9, Moby Dick by Herman Melville. I like Herman Melville, especially Bartleby the Scrivener. I've started Moby Dick but not finished it. but it's on that shelf in my bedroom that I was telling you about earlier. Number 9, Moby Dick by Herman Melville. Number 8, Anna Karenina by Leo Tolstoy. Another Russian novel, also supposed to be very long, set in 19th century Russia, revolves around the life of Anna Karenina, a high society woman who, dissatisfied with her loveless marriage, embarks on a passionate affair with a charming officer named Count Vronsky. Maybe this would make a nice double feature with Madame Bovary. I don't know. They're both about extramarital affairs. Anyway, I mean to read that one. Number 7, 1984 by George Orwell, which I read the first time in 1984. I was 14 years old. We read it in English class. Or I read it in English class. Many of my classmates did not read it. It's amazing how you can pass English classes without actually reading the required reading to me. Anyway, most people know what 1984 is about. It's about a dystopian future where Big Brother is watching. Of course, we're not living in that dystopia. We're living in a dystopia where we're watching Big Brother. It's kind of a different thing. Number 6, Lolita by Vladimir Nabokov. Okay, so Lolita is also a great movie. And I'm talking about the... sorry, I'm typing here too because I'm looking something up that I want to talk about. Stanley Kubrick film is the one I'm talking about that's so good. But it's really, really good. But Lolita has a great opening too, okay? So it goes like this. It's just beautifully written. Lolita, light of my life, fire of my loins, my sin, my soul, Lo-li-ta. The tip of the tongue taking a trip of 3 steps down the palate to tap at 3 on the teeth. Lo-li-ta. She was low, plain low in the morning, standing 4 feet 10 in one sock. She was Lola in slacks. She was Dolly at school. She was Dolores on the dotted line. But in my arms, she was always Lolita. Now, this is an odd book. It's about a professor. I believe his name's Humbert, and I've read this one. But he develops this really unhealthy crush on his landlady's daughter, Lolita, and it turns into something. Not a sexy book, and not as creepy as you think it's going to be either. I mean, it's creepy. I mean, the whole premise is creepy. You know, I think she's 14 years old or 12 years old or something like that in the book. I don't know. Anyway, she's not a sympathetic character in the film, but then neither is her mother. No, there are no sympathetic characters in the film. Number 5, The Catcher in the Rye. Another one that I've actually read by J.D. Salinger. It's funny this comes up because I'm in the middle of Shoeless Joe by W.P. Kinsella. Shoeless Joe is the novel that Field of Dreams was based on. And in the movie Field of Dreams, there's a fictional author named Terrence Mann. But in the novel, Shoeless Joe, the author that he kidnaps is J.D. Salinger, Jerry Salinger. Well, of course, it's completely fictional. Of course, Salinger's dead now, but everybody always used to like to speculate about what he was like and stuff because he was a hermit. The novel, The Catcher in the Rye, follows the story of a teenager named Holden Caulfield who's just been expelled from prep school, and it covers the 3 days afterwards. He experiences various forms of alienation, and his mental state continues to unravel, which is a persistent theme in the books of J.D. Salinger. There were only so many that were published before he stopped writing and publishing. 9 Stories is particularly good, and Franny and Zoe is also really good. But I feel like everybody should read everything by J.D. Salinger. I'm not sure that The Catcher in the Rye is the best book you could read by J.D. Salinger, but it's the one that made the list, and it's the most famous one. Number 4, 100 Years of Solitude by Gabriel Garcia Marquez. This is an example of magical realism. I've read other books by Marquez, but not 100 Years of Solitude, although I read most of it for class 30 years ago. It's a multi-generational saga that focuses on the Buendia family, who founded the fictional town of Macondo. And it can be hard to keep up with. I read a lot of it, and a lot of the characters throughout the generations have the same names as their ancestors, which makes it complicated, as you might imagine. Number 3, this was the one I was talking about earlier. Okay, so this is exciting. In Search of Lost Time by Marcel Proust. If you go to my channel, you will find a video called Proust in 2025. I'm hosting a read-along and discussion that's going to take a year of In Search of Lost Time. And my co-host for this is my friend Greg at Another Bibliophile Reads. So it's actually 7 volumes because it's too many pages to put in one particular book. But it's like the 8th longest novel ever, over 3,000 pages. And from what I understand, it is best read slowly with the accompaniment of a journal, which I'm planning to do. Number 2 is Ulysses by James Joyce. I'll be putting this one off for a while. I'm saving this one. It's supposed to be really hard. Set in Dublin, the novel follows a day in the life of Leopold Bloom, an advertising salesman, as he navigates the city. And I guess it's a retelling of the Odyssey, but in a really strange way. So I guess in that respect, it's something like Oh Brother, Where Art Thou, which is a Coen Brothers film that also retells the Odyssey, but it's so different that it's hard to recognize. Finally, number 1 on the list of the 50 greatest books of all time. Anybody want to guess? Okay. Number 1 is The Great Gatsby by F. Scott Fitzgerald, which I read twice this year. Because it was so good the first time, I went back and read it a second time. Is it the greatest book of all time? I don't know. That's the consensus based on this algorithm. But, they were using a similar algorithm 3 years ago, and the list was in a different order and had some different books on it. And some of these books weren't in the top 50 then. But The Great Gatsby's great. It's set in 1922. Jay Gatsby is in love with a woman he hasn't seen in several years. I guess he hadn't seen Daisy in like 5 years, but he's obsessed with her. So he's gone out and made himself rich so that he can fit in with her society, built himself a mansion across the bay from where she lives, and throws massive parties, all in the hope that she will show up for one and they'll get to reconnect. And one of the reasons I love the novel is because, man, I can relate to Gatsby's obsession with this woman, Daisy. My life's been a series of them. So anyway, that's it. That's the list of the 50 greatest books of all time, along with my reaction to them. And as I predicted, I've read 17 of the 50. And I'll probably reread those again. That's roughly 1/3 of them. So I'm literate, but not as literate as I would hope to be. But I'm going to try to read most of these in 2025. In Search of Lost Time, of course, is my main project, but I need to, firm up my knowledge of the classics. And I generally read about 100 books a year, so this will be half my reading for the year. Or maybe more, maybe less. Some of these books are pretty long. So, what are some books that should have been on this list that weren't included? What are some books on here that you hate and were included even though they're not very good? Put some stuff in the comments. Talk to me, folks. I'll be back with another video very soon. Until then, stay sexy and stay hydrated. Did you know that dehydration can raise your blood pressure? Trust me, I know about this one.